This is Suzanne Cameron, the DFO of CSRIC 7. I'd like to begin today by thanking all of you for your flexibility in accommodating our move to the wholly electronic format. We are the first in the Commission to hold a FACA meeting this way. As you have been able to tell, we've had some technical difficulties. I really appreciate everyone's patience and ask you to hold your patience throughout the meeting. And to help us run smoothly, please remember to mute your phones when you're not speaking, as there'll be feedback if you don't. Today, you'll be voting on two reports: a report on the current state of interoperability in the nation's 911 systems, drafted by Working Group 4, 911 Security Vulnerabilities, and presented by Working Group 4 Chair Mary Boyd, and also a report on best practices for broadcast resiliency during major storms and disasters, drafted by Working Group 5, Improving Broadcast Resiliency, and presented by their chair, Pat Roberts. You will then also hear from Working Groups 1, 2, 3, and 6 on their progress. With that, I officially open the meeting and turn the meeting over to Charlotte Field, our CSRIC chair.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And also I'd like to extend my thanks to Jeff and Suzanne for pulling this together, considering that everybody is remote. So again, please bear with us, but I think at the end of the day, this will be, a first for the FCC Commission running in a totally telephonic way. So before I start with roll call, I did want to bring to everyone's attention that Greg Stone, who was a member of Working Group 4, unfortunately passed away unexpectedly in early February. Greg was the Public Safety Portfolio Manager at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency at DHS and had more than 30 years experience in public safety and national security, emergency preparedness, telecommunications. I know his loss was felt by Working Group 4, and our thoughts are with his friends and family. So with that, I'm going to move over to the roll call, and I'm going to start with, I'm going to start with Brandon Abley. Brandon, if you're on mute, if you could just say you're here. Okay. Mark Annis. Mary Boyd.
Yes, ma'am.
Wade Buckner.
I'm here.
Thank you. Ryan Daly. Jay English.
I'm here.
Thank you. Lori Flaherty.
Lori's on. Afternoon.
Thank you. Greg Fugat.
Greg's here.
Thank you. Robert Gessner.
I am here.
Thank you. James Gorky.
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you. Mark Hess.
Mark's here.
Thank you. Antoine Johnson. Farouk Kadabi.
Present, thank you.
Thank you, Farouk. Chandra Katura. Jeff Littlejohn. Tim Lorello. Michelle Manelli McInerney.
Michelle's on. Thank you.
Thank you. Danny McPherson.
I'm present.
Thank you. Joe Meyer.
Here.
Susan Miller.
Susan's here.
Thank you. Richard Berlato. Michael Rapp. Pat Roberts.
Here.
Jeff Robertson. Travis Russell.
Present and healthy.
Thank you. Francisco Sanchez.
I'm here.
Thank you. Dorothy Spears Dean.
I'm here.
Thank you. Lee, I think I heard you. Lee Thibodeau.
I am here.
Brian Trosker.
Present.
Thank you. Steve Watkins.
Steve Watkins is here.
Thank you. And John Williamson. Okay.
It looks like we have quorum.
Yep, we have a quorum. Thank you very much for everyone's attendance. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Mary Boyd, who's the chair of Working Group 4, 911 Security Vulnerability. Mary?
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff, as we discussed prior to the meeting starting, we're going to move through these slides rather quickly. We have some of our CSRIC members that are doing double duty dealing with COVID-19, so I'm going to move quickly, Council. Jeff, if you could go to our next slide. As we have briefed in the past, Working Group 4 is focused primarily on 911 and next generation 911, looking at legacy and the transitional stages that our country is going through as we migrate to a full end state of IP technologies. It's during those transitional states and in the hybrid blend that we get some risk on our networks and in particularly security risk. Our charter, this for CSRIC 7, is really focused on the security risk. This is the continuation of initiatives that have gone on for several years. So today we're going to begin to identify some of our reports, but I'll recap really what our focus is for this initiative for CSRIC 7. Jeff, let's go to the next slide, please. Our objective from the commission was to identify the security risk, not only in our legacy, our old 911 networks, not that they're old, they're just older, transitional 911 networks, and then next generation, and recommend best practices. They also ask us to look at the vulnerabilities and put them on a risk, put risk level assignments on them and remediation expense. Jeff, let's go to the next slide. But after that, the commission actually came back and said, could you look and survey the current state of interoperability in our country, which is perfect timing given what we're faced with today with COVID-19. So we, commission asked us to look at the legacy networks and the transitional stages to see where we are in the interoperability of those 6,000 plus systems across our country. And to help us through this report that we're giving today, they actually defined interoperability, as you see on the slide, so that we didn't spend many, many months debating that. We want to thank the commission for setting us on that definition. It did definitely save us some time. Jeff, let's move forward to the next one. The one part that we focused on for our first report was that we had to remain mindful since we were looking at surveying and collecting data, that there are federal rules that govern collecting of information and surveying of information. We were very, very mindful. I want to thank Rasul. I know he's on this call with us today. He's our liaison for the commission. He kept us straight and narrow on the rules. So we were able to utilize existing 911 reports. I'll talk about those today, and which we use to collect the information and publish. And then we also utilize the public safety associations and the local 911 program offices to collect the data in order to report out to you today. All right, let's go to the next one, Jeff. Our second report is really to review, as I mentioned earlier, the hybrid systems and looking at the security vulnerabilities. This report, we're just kicking this initiative off. We started that earlier this month. We will use several data points as well, looking at, if there's outage information that we can get access to and looking at security risk. We'll be looking at the transitional networks, utilizing subject matter experts in 911 and cyber issues to look at the hybrid networks. There has been a lot of work already done, Council, in identifying the various points as we do this transition. So Working Group 4 is ready to hit the ground with all of the architecture work that's been done to begin to peel the layers back and identify the vulnerabilities on those networks. and then look at any of the barriers to implementation. Okay, Jeff, let's go to the next one. Our third and final report for CSRIC 7 from Working Group 4 is actually a parallel initiative to Report 2. This is where we will actually look at looking at the risk, putting some levels to that in terms of priorities, and then looking at mitigation. We've already begun to talk about, as we're working Report 2, be mindful of our deliverable on 3 and try to work those parallel. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, just to recap, as you know, we're reporting out today on interoperability. Our second report is due to the Council in September. We will remain the optimist and hope that we can finish that up early and get it to Council, but our deadline is in September, and then the final report is in March of 2021. All right, Jeff, let's go to the next slide, please, sir. This is just, once again, acknowledging all the talent. I've referred to this as the A-team for Stacy Hartman, who's possibly on by web today. My apologies, Stacy. I didn't get the slide updated. She's actually with CenturyLink. I haven't renamed her company for her. My apologies. The grade, as the chairwoman acknowledged the loss of Greg Stone, DHS is actually working to make a recommendation for replacing Greg. It was a loss, and as well, we offer our condolences to his family. Such a tragic loss in that family. Jeff Robertson has stepped down from Working Group 4. I just want to make that note. He was with Rapid SOS. He's recently moved over to Intrado to become Life and Safety's president. So he graciously stepped down so we didn't have a conflict of interest in Working Group 4. All right, Jeff, let's go to the next one. Okay, I'm going to move through our report. As Suzanne said, Council's had this report for about a week and a half now. Our scope was to look at where we are nationally and interoperability through the different transitional stages, working to next generation 911. Jeff, if you'll take us to the next slide, please, slide 14. The report you received has a structure for executive summary. We provided you historical background and how we actually have remained consistent with the Commission in working in prior CSRIC initiatives, moving towards where we are today. You will find, as we lay this report out, you're going to find references to other work within the Commission, the task force on optimal PSAP architectures, TFOPA. We use CSRIC 6 initiatives, and this allows for continuity between the different initiatives for the Commission. We did a lot of analysis on some of the existing data that's out there today. You'll hear that readout as well, ultimately giving Council a progress report on where we see the country today in this migration and achieving the ubiquitous interoperabilities. We do have some findings and conclusions out of this research. All right, Jeff, if we'll move to slide 15, sir. This slide actually recaps some of our data sources that we used. As I indicated earlier, we used a lot of existing data, which is really what we were required to do. We could not do an exhaustive research on our own. It was through this independent research that we were able to include all the data that is in this report. One of them is the National Plan for Migrating to IP-Enabled 911 Systems. The National 911 Program Office released this in 2009. The Program Office is actually part of the next report as well on the 911 Readiness Scorecard. We use in that TFOPA report, you'll see the transitional phases to a full national end state. That is work, and Lori Flaherty once again, we'll acknowledge the good works of the National Program Office for consistency for our country. We use their work. We've actually, built off of that foundational work to analyze and publish these reports. So just a shout out to the program office for being there and being a good partner. The program office also issued their National Progress Report. This is something that many of the members of Working Group 4 actually are engaged in. Jim Gerke is on this call with us. Jim's involved with this, his roles in regional and state 911 program offices. That was perfect timing for this initiative. We were able to look at that quantitative data. Council, if you're a statistical analysis person, you probably got sweaty palms over all the data that was analyzed in this report, where we could extract interoperability information. So you really have some good quantitative data on that. And then we also had APCO helped us with some of their very large public safety answering points in the big metropolitan cities that they were able to collect data from as well. Jeff, let's go to that next slide. I'm going to just quickly recap for those of you who may not live and breathe the maturity states, the transitional stages of Next Generation 911. This tracks where the Commission asked us to look at these transitional stages and the hybrid states to look for where there's security risks that get introduced, but this is also where we look to see how much interoperability we have. The legacy state is just, what it says. This is our traditional incumbent local exchange carrier, traditional circuit switched infrastructure. That's sort of your foundational level where we start. TFOPA actually has the scorecard. We developed that for our local governmental entities to give a checklist on how they begin to move forward. The second phase was the foundational state. This is really where your groundwork begins in NG 911 planning. They start developing feasibility studies. You will see coming out of the program office research and our analysis on interoperability, you will see where we begin to analyze and look at where we are in next generation 911 and ESInet deployment. So this foundational state really starts where the work on next gen begins. This is the GIS preparation that's needed. It's the IP network foundational work. And then as the 911 projects begin to transition in that third phase, they begin to really move into an IP infrastructure. Their ESI nets are in place. Their routing networks are being utilized. And really, this is the first state where next generation core services are implemented. And their governance model is established. And you've moved away from that, single purpose county by county traditional system and architecture for 911 purposes. Jeff, let's go to the next slide. The final three stages in this transition as these 911 systems mature is your intermediate state. Your 911 authorities are in place. This is where your core functions are operational. You begin to see, your call handling equipment is IP. Your GIS boundaries are all, your routing by GIS boundaries. You've got, multimedia call handling systems. You really begin to get in an advanced architecture, and then they move into a jurisdictional end state. This is where all the PSAPs within that next generation footprint are served by I3 standards-based systems. They're the elements. They're from ingress through multimedia. They're working with call handling systems. They've got SIP interfaces, location information from the time of call setup. And the ultimate end game is the national end state, where all PSAPs in this country are served by, I3 standards-based or, elements from an ingress to a full multimedia call handling. national, and that's a small. And Lori always says this, small n, but we have a nationwide interconnected ESI nets throughout this country. And so that sort of recaps, that's our foundation and how we looked for interoperability. Jeff, let's go to the next slide. As I indicated, we used a lot of different data sources as we began to analyze interoperability. The National Association of State 911 Administrators was one of those sources. I thought that this slide, sort of the picture tells 1,000 words. We had 37 states respond and help validate and answer data questions. They were surveyed and asked questions like, can you tell us your level of interoperability from basic voice 911 all the way to mapping data to computer-aided dispatch data to TTY? We were not surprised to see, voice 911 certainly got the highest score for interoperability. And you can see across the top of the slide, the various colors indicate whether there's no interoperability or you get all the way to the, to interstate interoperability. If for David Firth and I talked about this report yesterday, thank you, David, for the compliments on this. It is probably the best snapshot today of what our country looks like in terms of interoperability. So let's go to the next slide, Jeff, and I'll kind of summarize a lot of this data. But from the NASNA, from the state 911 programs, as I indicated, voice was probably the highest level of interoperability. But I think we found it was very, very important to point out that the technologies that are used to manage the incidents in the field through, dispatch of emergency response field personnel, they really have the lowest level of interoperability. And there's, that's a whole session into itself. But we really need our country focused as well on the interoperability of that technology. And then we also wanted to point out that, as more the technologies advance and used day to day by the general public, our PSAPs are not still catching up with the need for multimedia services. That's still a very low level of interoperability as well. And you can see on that second bullet coming out of our, at the end of 2019 on the National Progress Report, we do have 39% of the participants in this survey actually have awarded statewide next-gen contracts. So, as some of us been in this a long time now, that's a great sign to see our country moving in that speed and that high of percentage going towards these contracts. And that 31% of our PSAPs, remember there's a little over 6,000 of them, have implemented ESI nets or in the process of implementing. Okay, let's go to the next one, Jeff. We've also wanted to point out to the council that we recognize we do have a huge focus on cybersecurity threats and mitigating, putting strategies in place to mitigate those threats. And doing this research on interoperability was really kind of the baseline for us to complete the next activities. But you'll see in the bold, and for the record, I'm going to sort of read this to you. The greater the state of current interoperability, the greater the immediate need for cybersecurity threat identification and mitigation technologies and strategies. That needs to stay first and foremost for all the participants of Work Group 4 for us to go heads down on this work, but more importantly, the implementation to minimize any threats on our country's emergency communications system. All right, next slide, Jeff. So, Council, in conclusion, we do believe the country still needs to be moving forward with the deployment of next generation 911. Certainly what we're faced with today in our country, we all prepare, those of us who are in public safety and public safety technologies, pandemic issues is what we have always envisioned could happen in our country. Now we need the dynamic technologies to manage that. The way to do that is with an IP 911 environment. So we must move forward with this with a strong focus on interoperability. So as the commission defined, it doesn't really matter where that call came from and where that data came from. We can move it across the country when we need to and do it quickly. And those systems need to be built on standards-based solutions. The quicker we can get these solutions implemented and tested, the quicker our country is going to meet the goal of what the commission is seeking to do, and that's experience the full benefits of full-scale interoperability. So, Council, that concludes our report. That's a very fast report. Madam Chair, I'm going to just recap, our next reports will be coming to us in September. We'll continue that work. I'm going to turn this back over to you, Councilwoman, for any questions. And if you want to ask for a formal vote now for adoption, I'm going to turn that back over to you.
Thank you, Mary. So first of all, I'm going to open up the floor for any questions or comments that want to be made by the committee here. Just reminding everybody, if you're on mute, you need to take yourself off of mute. Hearing no questions or comments, I'd like to take a vote on Working Group 4, Report Number 1. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those not in favor, nay. Thank you very much. Report 1 has been voted on successfully as an aye. And now we'll move over to, pardon me?
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
That on the record.
Thank you, Mary.
The first one. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your leadership and also the support of your team. We're going to move on to We're going to move on to Working Group 5. Pat Roberts.
Thank you, Suzanne. First of all, welcome to Florida. We'd love to have you come visit us when we reopen, but obviously Florida's getting hit as hard as any state probably. But I want to first thank, you got the lengthy report, and today we'll go through the overview of it all and the recommendations. I want to, so Jeff, if you'll go to the next slide. I want to thank all the members of the working group. We had great participation. The great thing this time was we had broadcasters, but we also had local and state and federal emergency management people. Then we had allied services from cable, cellular, local law enforcement. So we had a really broad group of 3 different groups. So we had great participation. I want to thank all the members. Jeff, if you'll go to the next slide on the executive summary. So our task was to look at the best practices for disasters, and it started out mainly hurricanes, but we added wildfires, floods, earthquakes. Obviously, at that time, we did not add anything about pandemic, but Suzanne, in the next council 2 years from now, that probably needs to be added. But it was great having all 3 groups, and we broke into 3 working groups to give us information and research, and it was an excellent group of people. And we had private sector, and we had government agencies from the federal, state, and local level. Jeff, the next one. So our objective was to come up with a new set and best recommendations for best practices and suggestions to this group to adopt, looking at the future of broadcast resiliency and staying on the air. So we went back and looked at everything from Hurricane Andrew in '92 through Hurricane Michael, plus the wildfires in California and the floods in Houston. So we covered everything. The scope was very broad. We didn't want to leave any piece out. And this time, I think that by including like cable and cellular and the technology companies, we've got a much better list of recommendations going forward. We did not do any quantitative research, but we gathered information from all the subject matter experts, and everybody gave their input. I've got to thank not only our working group, but my staff who helped pull it all together and concise it, so we came up with the recommendations. Jeff, if you'll go to the next slide. So I think I pretty much covered, and I said earlier, we're going to try to go through this thing pretty quick, but, you know, broadcasters become the life-saving informational source during any kind of disasters, whether it's wildfires, tropical storms, hurricanes, earthquakes. So we take that job seriously. We try to stay on the air no matter what. So the background was great. We got input from them, but then input from our partners and what else we could do to improve the system. So I want to thank everybody for the input they gave us. Now let's go to the next slide for best practices. We've got 25 best practices. Many of these are the same as have been there in the past. Obviously, in the past, we recognized the key is staying on the air and having power. In the past, it really focused on the transmitters and making sure the tower and the transmitters worked and there was fuel. What we've learned recently is not only do you have to stay on the air from the transmitter, but the studio. And so there were issues in Hurricane Michael where the studios, some of them got destroyed, and that never happened in a hurricane before, where we lost 2 stations in television and 2 in radio, where they lost their ability to, the studios lost their roofs and things. So we're looking at power at both locations, backup fuel. So we've listed all these different things to cover everything we could think of, from generators, backup generators, power, fuel. But then we expanded it and went into other areas. And I'm not going to go through all 25 of these, but if we want to go back and go through them, we can. I think most of you had to report for 2 days. But we looked at staffing and what you do with your staff, because everybody has these policies. And then when hell breaks loose, you're like, well, am I going to let the employees bring their families? Am I going to let them bring their pets? So we're obviously not mandating anything, but we're saying you've got to plan early on what you're going to do. Besides just having power to stay on the air, how are you going to operate with supplies, food, cots, and your employees? Then a checklist to make sure everybody knows what they need to do. The one thing we learned before, oh, Jeff, you can start changing them. I'm already at about 2 slides later. So, I'm sorry, I'm jumping through these things pretty quick. If anybody's got questions, they can ask. The other things we figured out was the identifying all your suppliers. So in an entire, as you may know, Hurricane Michael was unique, unlike anything we've seen other than Hurricane Andrew. But it was different. It was a Cat 5, and it literally wiped out the supply chain in that whole community. So you need to go look not only your community, but beyond. The other big deficiency we found was the lack of relationships between not only the state emergency management, which we have good in Florida, but the first responders in their community, knowing your police department, the sheriff's office, the emergency management office. So we're recommending they start now building those relationships, not when there's a storm coming, not when a fire breaks out, but start building the relationships early on so everybody is tied together and everybody is working together. Then we looked at the telephone calling tree where people can know how to reach everybody, and there's a system in place for employees and everybody else to reach. Even suggested looking at satellite phones, maybe 1 or 2 per station in case you lose. In Hurricane Michael, we had one cell provider that went totally down, not for a day, not for a week, but for like 2 months. The next slide, Jeff. The one thing that was brought to our attention, and I've got to say the cellular companies were great. FCC set up priority calling, and as first informers, we're not first responders, but broadcasters, especially radio, when you lose power, is the only means of communication. So getting it set up, and we hope the FCC will add broadcasters to their priority calling system, so we'll be able to make sure we can get cell service when it's available. I mean, whether you go to a football game or a disaster or any of those things, cell service starts getting very limited. So we're pushing everybody to look at doing that. And if we can't get it by priority, then we want to be on the list to go ask for it and get listed. The last is FCC has set up DERs, and many stations have not signed up. So we're recommending pushing hard for everybody to sign up and be ready to do that and participate. That way, everybody's flow of information. And I've got to say, the FCC, the last 5 years have improved communication, letter support, access support over the last 5 years like never before. So I want to thank the FCC for that. One of our recommendations is NAB represents all the states. And so is with the FCC and the members of the council, we'll work with NAB to put together the new best practices, get it out to every broadcast station, every broadcast group, so they know what to do. Then we'll also work closely with FEMA and DHS. In addition to us getting the access letters, cable would like the access letters too, to be able to get our signals back on the air and be able to reach the community. And basically the final one is we all have to work better with Facebook, Google, and everybody during the disasters that carry our signals. And so we're recommending broadcasters already have a pre-existing relationship there, and that Facebook, Instagram, Google give a priority thing during a disaster to move us to the front page or to feed that information out to their community that's been impacted. So, Suzanne, that's kind of the next slide, Jeff. That's kind of the conclusion of our group. I think it's been a good working group. I think we've got great new ideas, and so I would now recommend that the council consider adopting it, but I'll take any questions. I know that was fast.
Thank you, Pat. Are there any questions from the committee on Pat's working group recommendations, conclusions?
Pat?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Bob Gessner. I'm curious, it goes through there so quickly. Is there any recommendation there that broadcasters and cable operators work together to provide redundant access to broadcast signals, meaning broadcast as well as fiber-based?
I know we recommended there's got to be a closer working relationship, Bob. I'll go back and look in the actual report. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, because that's
says
that's a big problem for some of us. It's, you know, some operators already have studio feeds. I don't know if they even use the over-the-air signal. And some of us have broadcast is our primary, and we have kind of a jury-rigged system where we might be able to pull it from a neighboring system through an interconnection. But we've always been a little concerned about the legality or propriety of that. So
I'll be glad to work with you. And if it's not in there, I know we talked about the relationship with our cable providers because you are crucial. But when we get with NAB and myself and everybody, if you'll help me, we'll make sure in the guidelines sent out by NAB that that's mentioned. But we also have to look at everything from a market 212, right, New York City market number 1. And there is a world of difference, as you know, in your world and in our world. There ain't the 100 and lower markets are totally different than the top 25 markets.
Yep. And there, of course, there may be some opportunities in the C-band reallocation to improve the connectivity in terms of bandwidth as well as just access to some of those smaller, more distant markets.
Oh yeah, and that's
okay.
The small
Thank
markets are my biggest concern.
Yep. You answered my question. Thank you.
Well, and by the way, Hurricane Michael hit a market 100 plus, and that was a new world. Any other questions
for Pat? No, it doesn't look like Pat. Any other questions? So that was a good question, though, Bob. I wrote something down on my follow-up on list. So let's do this. Let's take a vote on Pat's report. May I have the ayes, please?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Do we have any nays? Pat, thank you and the team. We have an approved report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along, we'll turn on to Working Group one for an update, and that's Craig.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let's go to the next slide. Our four areas, again, just reviewing quickly: establish, maintain communication between industry stakeholders and alert originators, and then working the subgroup on two, maintaining and developing that relationship to leverage during emergencies. Next slide. Redundant communication between alert originators and industry stakeholders. And then the final one, which is an important element, we have a false alert to correct or retract. So let's go to the next slide. What we ended up doing was we found that subgroups 1 and 2 were really dealing about personal relationships, the connection between alert originators, whether it's the weather service or local or state emergency managers, and the industry stakeholders, the broadcasters, cable operators, cell networks, et cetera. And so we are keeping the numbering separate, but that work group we actually combined. We had a chair of that work, one of the working groups who left and dropped off, and so they combined it. And their focus is really how do you maintain enduring communications day to day between alert originators and stakeholders. And then if there's an activation of that system, how to utilize those communication linkages and relationships. Again, this is more of just good practices day to day, does not address specifically a false alert, but would be key if a false alert was issued to provide that communications. And Pat Roberts will tell you in some states we have much better relationships than other states. But in far too many cases, I don't think people know who to call, what the number is, how to communicate. And that's, I think, overall recommendations there. Next slide. Working group, our subgroup 3, is really looking at how to maintain those communication links under adverse situations. And I think we'll probably be adding working from home to this conversation as we start seeing a distributed workforce that may be required, and that some of the key people may be in that situation. But that's moving along. The last subgroup of our working group has done quite a bit of work, and this is regarding the prevention of false alerts and then recovery from false alerts. And the prevention of false alerts will stay the same for all the modes. However, as they got into the false alert recalls and recovery for wireless emergency alerts in the emergency alert system, they found differences that need to be addressed separately. So they're working on protocols to do both WIA and EAS, but the prevention piece and a lot of the basic stuff will be consistent throughout all of the methods. But they are working on very specific process to recover from false alert, separate for WIA and EAS, and they'll split there. And our report's not due till later on this year, so we are still having a lot of discussions working through there. We're meeting about twice a month, and I see no impediments or issues. So, Suzanne, I'm open to any questions from the group.
Hi, this is Charlotte. Do we have any questions in the group? Thank you, Craig, for that update.
All right, thanks, Charlotte.
No problem. Okay, and we're going to move on to Working Group 2, Managing Security Risk in the Transition to 5G. Lee?
Good afternoon, Madam Chairperson. Thanks for the opportunity to provide the Council with a brief update regarding the work of Working Group 2. I'd like to just provide the Council with a very brief background that's driving our work and then a status on the efforts of the group. 5G technology, and particularly 5G wireless technology, really looks like it's going to be the network of the future, and it's likely to touch many aspects of our lives, from things like we hear about connected vehicles and smart cities to healthcare and so forth, but it's likely that we're still unable to imagine some of the use cases that 5G networks are going to deliver to our lives. And to deliver this variety of applications and services, 5G networks are going to have to be both highly scalable and highly flexible. And To that end, it appears that 5G represents the point where the telecommunications industry's legacy of reliability and privacy becomes fully merged with the flexibility and scalability of the information technology industry. Jeff, if you would advance the slide for me, please. Unlike the transition that we saw from 3G to 4G wireless technology, which required a complete replacement of both radio access network and core, the transition to 5G offers network operators the opportunity to begin introducing certain limited 5G services while preserving their investment in 4G networks using what's referred to as a non-standalone architecture. And in fact, we're seeing many operators will continue to invest in their 4G networks while they begin rolling and continue rolling out those limited 5G services. In doing that, the operator's 5G services will be subject to the risks and vulnerabilities that are carried forward from their 4G networks, and it's that transition period, referred to as non-standalone architectures, where the work of Working Group 2 is being focused. If you'd advance the slide, please, Jeff. Working Group 2 has been tasked to investigate this transition and the vulnerabilities that may carry forward from previous wireless technologies, specifically, most appropriately 4G, and recommend best practices to mitigate those vulnerabilities. Slide, please, Jeff. To accomplish its mission, Working Group 2 has been directed to submit 2 reports to the Council. In report number 1, due in June of 2020, the group will report on its review of the risks to 5G from legacy vulnerabilities and recommend best practices for mitigation. In report 2, which is due in December of 2020, we'll focus more on standards and the working group's recommendation for standards updates that might help mitigate those vulnerabilities. The slide, please, Jeff. In its work so far, Working Group 2 has heard from members of academia, from standards bodies, and from industry members with specific subject matter expertise. And we've also reviewed a number of technical papers regarding and relating to 5G security. One thing that we are seeing in the industry that we should note, and particularly true of smaller and rural carriers, are that carriers are already beginning to deploy these limited 5G services in non-standalone architectures and intending that to be their transitional phase to full 5G standalone architectures. Jeff, a slide, please. The working group continues to hold weekly conference calls, and we should also note that we've been collaborating often with Working Group 3 on specific topics, sharing information where it's appropriate, and we've participated in a number of joint calls for presentations from members of industry and on topics of interest to both working groups. Additionally, the working groups have shared technical papers and have provided one another with papers that we found that might be of interest to the other working groups. So I would compliment the collaboration and cooperation we've gotten from Working Group 3 in our efforts. A slide, please, Jeff. Report number 1 is being drafted, and we're on track to deliver it to the Council in the requested time frame in June. As well, we've begun working on a work plan for report number 2, and we'll start working on that immediately after the submission of report number 1. Jeff, a slide, please. I'd like to also thank the members of Working Group 2 for their participation and contributions to the team's work effort. Our team in our weekly conference calls have had some lively discussion and debate, and we've gotten very good contribution and participation from every member of the working group. Before I move on in that, I'd also like to single out for recognition for his contributions to our team, our editor, John Marino from CTI. John has served as our editor and is doing an outstanding job. He's put in a lot of hours capturing inputs, compiling and distributing report drafts, and helping us edit the document. So I'd like to thank John for those efforts. Slide, please, Jeff. In addition to that, I also want to recognize several people who are serving as alternates for some of the working group members. These alternate members have been very engaged in the work of the group and have all made solid contributions, so I wanted to thank them for their efforts as well. Slide, please. Our group continues to meet weekly via conference call, and as mentioned earlier, we've been collaborating with Working Group 3 and in some areas held joint meetings to hear from subject matter expertise and experts. Report number 1 is right about on schedule. I'd say it's perhaps slightly behind where the working group chairperson would like it to be at this point, but we are well on track to deliver it to the council on time. Slide, please, Jeff. This concludes my report, status report to on Working Group 2, and if there are any questions, I will attempt to answer them. Otherwise, thank you, Madam Chairperson, and I will turn it back to you.
Any questions for Lee on Working Group 2?
Yeah. Lee, this is Tim Lorella from Secular Solutions. It's just actually 2 questions. One is, we've had some concerns about the supply chain with regards to certain suppliers, some security concerns from certain suppliers. Is that something that you're also addressing in the report and the recommendations, or is that something you consider to be out of scope?
It's a good question, Tim. We had some very good debate on that. I think you'll find that the working group is going to touch on the issue of supply chain. It's kind of somewhat, I think, of a moving target that changes often. But there's a lot of work going on in the industry outside of our working group that is relative to supply chain, and we're trying to stay in touch with that, and we will likely be referencing some of that work, but our intent is not to dive any deeper into that supply chain topic than a survey of the work going on in the industry.
No, that's good. I appreciate that. The second question I have relates to Internet of Things. As a company really focused on security concerns, Internet of Things has become a major problem, for a lot of different reasons. Are you using any of the issues that have come out of IoT as backdrop for things that you might also consider for 5G, or do you consider 5G very separate from IoT in that respect?
IoT is another area that, IoT is probably one of the key driving use cases for 5G. I think that, and I want to speak for Working Group 3, I think you'd find that they may be diving a little bit deeper into IoT than we are in that transition phase, focusing on non-standalone architectures. But yes, we will be addressing certain aspects of that in Working Group 2.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Lee or the working group? Thank you, Lee. And also thanks to John Marino. Like you said, he's done an excellent job. Turning to Working Group 3, this is Farouk is going to do this one, Managing Security Risk and Emerging 5G Implementations. Farouk?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next slide, please. So in a way of background, I think Lee articulated very well the importance of security in 5G architecture and 5G network. So I'm not going to go any more details. Next slide, please. With respect to objective of Working Group 3, as we go from 3GPP release 15, 16, now release 17, obviously we want to make sure that we have a very good secure system end-to-end. So the Working Group 3, one of the objectives to make sure that the security aspects of 3GPP is well considered. Next slide, please. Also, 3GPP has a tendency to provide a lot of optionality in the standards. So one of the other objectives that we have is to understand what are these optional features and propose ways to mitigate and diminish any security risk as a result of these options. Next slide, please. So we have 2 reports. The first report is on network reliability and security risk reduction, and that report, we are working on that right now. Next slide, please. The second report is on identifying what's the best way to address all those optionalities that are in 3GPP specifications. Next slide, please. We have a very good group of expertise, and as I always say, without the help of our members, the work would not progress, and I'm very grateful that we have a very good group of people. Next slide, please. And we also have a number of alternates that have been very helpful and providing very good input into our work, so I appreciate their participation as well. Next slide, please. So we are meeting bi-weekly, but as Lee mentioned, we have often joint working group 2 and working group 3 calls during the off weeks, and also we are very grateful for ATIS providing all the necessary tools for us to make the progress, especially in this time when a lot of these web systems are failing. We have had a very good, smooth transition and working environment. Thank you for ATIS. Next slide, please. So the report 1 is due September 2020, and report 2 is due March 2021, and I will give a brief summary of our report 1 progress next. Next slide, please. As Lee mentioned, a lot of focus of working group 2 is on NSA, non-standalone, which is the leftmost figure. The working group 3's main focus is on standalone and any work that is really centered around 5G core network. So you see these are 3GPP terms, option 3, option 2, and so forth. So a lot of the focus of working group 3 is in option 2, which is the standalone architecture. And also I should mention that, as Lee mentioned, there will be potentially a time when there will be a combination of non-standalone and standalone networks in the system. So we are coordinating to make sure that transition as it happens, the standalone has the correct security interfaces to support that transition. Next slide, please. So the status, the work has been progressing fairly well. Our report is, in a very good shape already. We have over 60, 70 pages of text already, and we are now in the analysis phase. Thanks to our members, we are doing fairly good on getting the report ready on time. Next slide, please. So we're going to continue our work and our calls, and we are going to make sure that all the features in Release 16, and we are even looking at some of the new discussion in Release 17, and we will continue to work on our report. And as of right now, I think bi-weekly calls, fine, but as we get closer, in my past experience, we may have to switch to weekly calls as we get close to the deadline. But the work progress is sufficient right now that bi-weekly calls should suffice. And we will continue to provide reports to the council. Next slide, please. I think that's the end of it. So, Madam Chair, back to you to see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Farouk. Any questions for managing security risk and emerging 5G implementations?
I think Lee answered all the tough questions for me, too.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Farouk and the team, for the presentation of where you stand on Working Group 3. And now we'll move to Working Group 6.
Okay, Danny McPherson here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Hi, Danny.
And, everyone for joining this experiment today. It's going off really well. So I'll be quick and get us on track there. So anyway, you can move to the next slide, please. This slide's a bit unordered, and one of the things I realized I should have an alternate member slide, which I will next time because they are carrying a lot of the work currently. But this is the current list of members, and the council members are annotated with an asterisk there. Let's move on to the next slide. So this is the meat of the update. Bottom line, we've completed the things on the left. We're largely on track. The next steps for us are to outline how the industry is dealing with the vulnerabilities that we've identified and the gaps in those, any gaps that may exist, and then of course make some recommendations to address those gaps or places where the industry or other places development work may need to occur, and best practices and so forth to address any gaps in security posture. The key deliverables back to the council. We have a vote in Q1 of 2021, but we hope to have a draft ready for the council to review in the Q4 meeting of this year. Okay, so you can move on to the next slide. So we're preparing some subject matter expert briefings now, independent of the current work product that we have, to make sure that we didn't miss anything outside of our immediate observation space, and that we can understand what other folks may believe we should be looking at that we may not have identified. So we're scheduling those subject matter expert briefings and working with that. We're also, as with other working groups that the FCC's helped out with, and a number of folks who've spoken already, we're working to identify other adjacent organizations, for example, GSMA, that have some fantastic work products that we want to leverage, and making sure that all the working group members have access to that as appropriate. So we're working through that where appropriate with the working group, and we've got the roadmap laid for how to do that in partnership with the FCC folks. So, and then finally, just making sure that we identify the gaps and leverage everything. Addis has provided some content on best practices and some background on that, and has provided a lot of the infrastructure we've been leveraging. So we're thankful for their support there. We continue with biweekly conference calls, and the subject matter expert briefings and others may be outside of that normal biweekly window or briefing window. But beyond that, we have a pretty good cadence, and we're pretty comfortable we're going to meet our deliverables to address the work products we're responsible for the CSRIC Council. Okay, next slide. Just another illustration. There is one thing kind of missing on this slide, is that in Q4 2020, we intend to provide a draft copy to the council for review and comments if they may have any at the time, and then we'll provide our final report within Q1 of 2021. I do want to give a particular shout out to John Newstar of Peterson, John Peterson of Newstar, as well as Vlad Wollstonecroft from Twilio for serving as primary editors of the work that we've done. But like I said, a lot of the alternates have provided some great input, and I believe we're making good progress. On to the next slide. And that's it. So any questions for the working group before I pass this back over?
Danny, hi, this is Tim Lorello from Secular. I'm sorry to have so many questions today, but this is topics that I care about. So on this particular topic in particular, on SIP vulnerabilities, are you looking at the specific vulnerabilities associated with SIP uniquely, or are you also looking at sort of the broader things like DDoS and even the most recent Ben Gurion article on DDoS attacks that impact VoIP? Just out of curiosity, how specific are you getting in this report?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. Is one of the things that we drew some lines on initially was, here are the things within the SIP protocol, and here are the operational implementation things we need to be concerned with. And then here are systemic dependencies that enable this, and sort of externalities we need to be concerned with. And then, even wider than that, here are policy and legal and other things that we'll assess those, I think, once we put the three core products there together. But those three items, again, the SIP protocol functions, the operational implementation, and then systemic dependency kind of items, are the three that are directly in scope. And then we have a couple of subject matter experts in the broader areas as well. And when we get to that point, we're going to see if we need to address those. We'll probably at least catalog those in the report as for future work, and go from there. So that's a great question, and that's sort of exactly how we started out addressing this and working our way out in those various layers. But hopefully, when folks see the draft report as well, that they'll get a better idea of what areas we may need to do future work in, or if there are things we can address within that remaining 4-month window or so for the working group. We'll be sure to do that as well. But that said, you can always send requests to us to say, hey, we'd like to make sure that you address DDoS, which is, an availability, an obvious issue that we'll take some consideration of. But if anyone has any concerns, we're always open to feedback from anyone from the working group perspective unilaterally. You're welcome to contact any of the working group members and say, hey, I'd appreciate it if you guys would consider this. So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that.
Great answer. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Danny. So essentially, we've concluded the meeting for today. We had 2 yay votes for the 2 reports that were presented by Mary and also by Pat Roberts. So that's good, and it sounds like all of the working groups are making good progress. Essentially, the other thing I did want to say is that we did define a time frame for the next meeting, which will be June 11th. So if you want to put that on your calendar, we've set that up for June 11th. It'll be at 1 o'clock in the same room, hopefully. However, I would also like to thank Jeff and Suzanne for pulling together this telephonic call. Even though we had a couple of blips at the beginning, I think it went exceptionally well with all the participants that we had on today for the CSRIC meeting. So with that, again, I want to thank the 2 working groups that did present, as well as the other 4 working groups that are doing their work. It's all important work, and I think, as Mary said early on, we're in uncharted waters. There's a lot of things that are happening, and the work that we're doing is, is direct, in my opinion, is directly, linked to making our nation and its systems more resilient, et cetera. So, Suzanne, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I would just like to say that I would just like to thank you all for participating today in the first FCC FACA meeting to go all electronic during this difficult time. And I know there were glitches today, but you were all patient and everyone kept their sense of humor, which I really appreciate. I feel very fortunate to be the DF for this group of people. I thank you all for the commitment you make to CSRIC. I know the reports presented today by working groups 4 and 5 took a great deal of research, thought, and time, and the diligence that you applied to this work is impressive. On behalf of the FCC, I thank you. You all have our sincerest gratitude. And with that, the 4th meeting of CSRIC 7 is now adjourned.